Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're acting as your definitive study guide to Shinto, Japan's incredibly beautiful indigenous animistic faith. As a historian and scholar of religion, I've got to say, I find Shinto absolutely fascinating. It really isn't just a set of beliefs, It's this profound spiritual worldview that literally shapes the daily life, the rituals, and the deep, deep ecological reverence of millions of people. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so before we can even begin to understand those stunning physical shrines or the vibrant festivals, we have to ask the foundational question that unlocks this whole belief system. So what exactly is the way of the kami?
Well, the word Shinto literally translates to exactly that, the way of the kami. But here's the thing, it isn't really a religion in the typical Western sense. Instead, think of it as an ancient, organic blend of animism and an absolute reverence for nature. It grew right out of small farming and fishing villages, and it's fundamentally tied to the physical geography of the Japanese islands themselves. Here's our agenda for today's explainer. We'll be looking at origins and core philosophy, core beliefs, purity, pollution, and the afterlife, Shinto rituals and shrines, matsuri and everyday practice, and finally, the types and sects of Shinto. All right, starting off with Section 1, Origins and Core Philosophy. Let's trace the ancient animistic roots of Japan. If we trace things all the way back to the Yayoi period, around 300 BCE, we see people revering the natural forces right in their own backyards. But it actually wasn't until the 8th century, specifically in 712 and 720 CE, that imperial rulers commissioned major texts like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. What they did was take these localized oral mythologies and essentially codified them to legitimize the ruling dynasty. That's when we get this grand narrative of divine descent from the sun goddess, Amaterasu. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that Shinto organically evolved without a central founder. There's no Jesus or Buddha figure here, no strict religious laws, and no singular absolute sacred scripture, like a Bible. Sure, the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki are highly revered historical and mythological chronicles, but they aren't strict doctrine. The whole thing is built entirely on shared mythos, local traditions, and an innate sense of awe. Moving right along to Section 2, Core Beliefs and Understanding the Kami. So the term kami is incredibly dynamic. They are not simply gods sitting up in some distant heaven. They are awe-inspiring life forces present right here in our immediate world. In fact, the Japanese often use the phrase yayo yorozu no kami, which translates to an infinite number, or literally 8 million gods. They inhabit the wind, the rain, ancient trees, striking boulders, and even majestic waterfalls. It's like the landscape itself is alive. And this brings us to a beautiful quote that perfectly captures the worldview. Shinto regards the land and its environment as children of kami. In other words, Shinto sees nature as the divinity itself. It fosters a profound awareness of the sacredness of life. You see, humans aren't viewed as masters towering over nature to dominate it. Rather, humanity and nature share the exact same divine origins. Let's transition to Section 3, Purity, Pollution, and the Afterlife. Here, we'll navigate the sacred and the shadowy aspects of the faith. Okay, so Shinto is fundamentally, absolutely obsessed with purity. The belief is that humans are inherently pure beings, but just by navigating the messy physical world, we occasionally accumulate something called kagare, which is spiritual impurity associated with things like death, disease, and bloodshed. This temporary state essentially blocks our communication with the kami. But the good news, it can be washed away through specific purification rituals known as harai. And the ultimate goal of all this purification is to achieve makoto, a sincere, genuinely truthful heart perfectly aligned with the will of the kami. Because of this intense focus on purity, sincerity, and vitality, Shinto is deeply tethered to the here and now. Unlike a lot of other religions that focus heavily on the hereafter, Shinto places its absolute highest value on cultivating harmony, health, and prosperity right now during our present earthly existence. It's all about securing blessings for a good harvest, a successful business, or just a healthy family today. And consequently, the afterlife just isn't the primary focus of Shinto worship. As we mentioned, death is heavily associated with kigare, that spiritual pollution. In the ancient myths, the realm of the dead is known as Yomi, this shadowy underworld or land of darkness. Because Shinto is so focused on life-giving natural forces, shrines generally do not even conduct funeral services. They keep the realm of death strictly separated from the pure spaces of the kami. However, that definitely doesn't mean the dead are just ignored. Far from it. Deceased ancestors are actually deeply venerated. Over time, these ancestral spirits undergo purification and can become ujikami. These are protective local or clan kami, so they remain intimately connected to the living, literally watching over their descendants and local geographic areas. And in return, the living express deep gratitude to them for the ultimate gift of life. All right, on to section 4, Shinto rituals and shrines. Let's look at the actual architecture of worship.
I'm sure you've seen one of these before. The iconic Torii Gate isn't just a pretty piece of architectural decoration. It visually and spiritually signals that you are literally leaving the ordinary, mundane world behind and crossing a boundary into a deeply sacred, purified environment where the kami reside. It's a real threshold.
Now, once you step inside, interaction with the kami requires some very specific etiquette. You always begin with chozu, that's using a wooden dipper to purify your hands and mouth with water. Next, you toss a coin offering into the box. And then you follow this beautifully rhythmic physical prayer. You bow deeply twice. You clap your hands exactly twice to alert the kami to your presence, and you finish by offering one final deep bow. It's a really grounding experience. Moving to section 5. Matsuri and everyday practice. This is all about living with the kami on a daily basis. Matsuri, or community festivals, are essentially the vibrant communal heartbeats of Shinto. They are deeply tied to the agricultural cycle. For example, you have the Kinensai, which is held in the spring to pray for a rich harvest. Then you've got the Ni-Namasai in the autumn, which is this grand offering of thanks. These festivals are absolutely crucial. They ensure continued harmony and explicitly express the community's dependency on and immense gratitude to the local kami for their survival and prosperity. But it's not all big festivals. On an everyday personal level, individuals actively secure blessings and protection for themselves. You'll see visitors acquiring these protective amulets called omamori for very specific needs, like traffic safety or maybe passing a tough exam. They also write their personal prayers or wishes on small wooden votive plaques called ema. It's a way of keeping that dialogue with the kami constant and personal. Finally, we arrive at section 6, types and sects of Shinto. Let's categorize the different expressions of the faith. To make sense of it all, scholars generally categorize the faith into a few distinct expressions. First, there's folk Shinto. This represents those ancient, highly localized practices and superstitions woven seamlessly right into daily life. Then there's Shrine Shinto, which is the more institutionalized worship you see at the tens of thousands of local and national jinja spread across Japan. Lastly, we have Sect Shinto, which refers to more modern, distinct religious movements that have emerged over the last couple of centuries, and interestingly, these often welcome converts. It's also important to touch on the history here. During the Meiji era, starting around 1868, the government effectively co-opted the faith. They organized it into what's known as state Shinto to fuel imperial nationalism and consolidate power around the emperor. But following World War II, this state-run version was formally dismantled. This allowed Shinto to gracefully return to its localized, community, and shrine-based roots. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought. In a world currently grappling with severe environmental crises, could adopting this ancient animistic perspective, actually treating the land, the rivers, and the mountains as sacred kin, deserving of our reverence, hold the key to healing our relationship with the planet? It's something to think about. Until next time, keep seeking to understand the fascinating world around you.